Wolfenstein The New Order is the best game about killing Nazis because it's not only about killing Nazis. Nazis are the easiest bad guys you can put into a piece of media. They're unequivocally bad guys, so most games don't go the extra step to remind you exactly why they're so hated. Wolfenstein does. Early on in the game, you experience horrible experiments by Death's Head involving mutilated corpses strung up in machinery, and are forced to choose which of your friends has to die, at which point Death's Head pulls their brain out in front of you while they're still alive. Part of the story is you infiltrate a concentration camp and witness the abuse and hopelessness of the place. Then, near the end of the game, you're forced to fight a robot being powered by the brain of the friend you chose to sacrifice at the beginning while they're unable to stop themselves and fully conscious of what they're doing. Did I mention this game is satire? Despite the brutality of the game, Wolfenstein is actually quite a ridiculous premise. In this universe, there's a secret Jewish Illuminati known as the Dot You Should, the pronunciation of which I probably butchered, who have secret troves of highly advanced technology that they hid from the world. The Nazis found one of these troves and used the technology to advance their own war machines and extend the length of the war, ultimately creating the nuclear bomb before the United States and forcing their surrender. The Nazis also have a base on the moon and robot dogs that are heavily implied to be based off of real dogs, to the point where you're saved when Wyatt plays fetch with one. And super soldiers that are also zombies. Still following? They also play very heavily into how cheesy it is to be an FPS protagonist. BJ survives so much bullshit in this game purely through sheer force of will, including a 14-year coma, getting stabbed repeatedly, getting drugged with enough tranquilizer to paralyze an elephant, getting blown up point blank by a frag grenade, and finally getting nuked, though that last part you don't really know until the sequel. And if any of you are familiar with the sequel, you also know that he survives getting his head cut off. If you still think Wolfenstein is supposed to be a serious game after all that, then you should be a politician. When you're not busy fighting Nazis, there's a great cast of characters to back the game's story up. My personal favorites are Set Roth, Max Haas, and Bombate, though I also distinctly remember liking a character named Jay on my first playthrough a few years ago. Unfortunately, if you pick Wyatt as the character who dies at the beginning, Jay doesn't show up at all throughout the campaign, even though he has some pretty involved scenes when he's there. Also, his real name is Jimi Hendrix, and he's definitely actually Jimi Hendrix, just not legally. The point at which you're supposed to make the choice of who dies is kinda weird. Up to that point, Wyatt is barely a character. He has his hero moment saving you from a robot dog, but Fergus is a much more upfront character and very confident and fun. But picking Fergus to live definitely feels like the weaker of the two choices overall, as Wyatt gets more character growth later on, and Fergus just gets depressed and resentful of the fact that you chose him, almost like the game is literally telling you that you picked the wrong option. The gameplay in Wolfenstein can best be described as Doom 0.5. The gameplay loop is fine, but it definitely holds on to standard FPS tropes a little too hard, and that bogs down the better elements of the gunplay. Something that Doom, which came out 2 years after this, didn't suffer from. Picking up ammo and health requires you to press the interaction key, which means a lot of combat is spent running around and spamming E, where it would have been a lot better had it been automatic. Also, enemies will drop armor but not health, which means that if you get low on health, you have to rely on running around finding health kits, instead of the Doom method of having enemies drop small amounts of health to continue being aggressive in gunfights. Though, one thing that this game has over Doom is the ability to stack health over your maximum amount of HP, which will slowly drain over time, but the overheal is a fun mechanic that they brought back from the originals. Enemies themselves are also not that interesting to fight. Most gunfights consist of regular dude, armored regular dude, or heavily armored regular dude, with the occasional heavily armored robot or heavily armored robot dog. Anything with armor is just a bullet sponge. They don't usually move around a lot, they're pretty easy to avoid getting shot by, and you're gonna use up all your ammo killing them. Given the fact that the world is already far into suspension of disbelief territory, it would have been a lot more fun to see some variety in how enemies behave, a la Doom 2016. This game also has a metric fuckload of screen shake. Literally everything you do in the game has your head slamming left and right like your neck is a spring. And anytime you're firing your weapon, the motion blur applied to everything makes it hard to figure out if you're actually killing something or if it's already been dead for a few seconds. You can force these things off via the command console on PC, but if you suffer from motion sickness like me and you're playing on a console, you might want to have some Dramamine nearby. Also, speaking of standard FPS tropes, the game has plenty of those, too. It was normal at the time, but scripted sections where you have to forego the standard gameplay loop in favor of pressing forward slowly or getting stuck in a turret really suck, and really date the game. Though the game at least doesn't have any QuickTime events, just a couple of button prompts every once in a while to make sure you're still paying attention. Overall, I think Wolfenstein The New Order is very much a product of the time, but its story and world building elevated is something to be remembered, and I recommend it for anyone who's never played. As usual, I'm sure there's something I wanted to talk about that I forgot about, but that's where I'm going to end this video. Thanks for watching. Fuck Nazis. Special thanks to my patrons whose continued support makes these videos possible. If you want to support the channel as well, patrons get a special avatar that goes at the end of the videos they help support, as well as early access to videos and full-res artwork from thumbnails.